And we're live again. Hi everybody, I'm Ryan Schumacher, and we're looking at part 2 of Book 1 of the Psalms. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the topic of worship in Book 1 of the Psalms. So if you haven't seen the first part, you can look at the other video. The first part of the video will discuss an introduction to Book 1, and then it will go through lament psalms using Psalm 22 as an illustration. The other thing I wanted to focus on in Book 1 of the Psalms, though, was the concept of worship. And I think that's important because worship is the subject of the sermon series that we're going through right now. And there's some important comments on worship that I think we can see in particular in this first book of the Psalms. I want to talk about the concept of acceptable worship. And it's something that might be a little uncomfortable for us. The idea of acceptable worship of God. In fact, we may remember the song. Do you remember this one? Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. You know that one? And then it goes on, just as you are to worship. Just as you are before your God. And that's my emphasis right there. I don't hear this song as much anymore. I'm kind of happy about it. But I want us to think about that concept. I want us to think about what we think is necessary for our worship to be accepted by God. The reason why this might cause some kind of cognitive dissonance is because of the way that we always talk about ourselves being accepted by God, regardless of anything that we've done. And there's a difference between election and our worship being accepted. For instance, in Exodus, Israel is chosen as God's people without following the Decalogue, without even getting the Decalogue, without worshiping Him in any particular way. In fact, Abraham was told in Genesis 15 that his people, his offspring, would be delivered from Israel, and that's 400 years after the event. So the election had nothing at all to do with their obedience, had nothing at all to do with the way they approached God. They were chosen, and we have that in our minds that we are chosen regardless of anything we've done, and that is correct. That is the New Testament doctrine. It is not earned. It is by grace alone, through faith alone. But does that carry over to our worship being acceptable? And I'm just going to start off here by saying I'm indebted to Dan Block, his book For the Glory of God, as well as his YouTube sermons, which are absolutely terrific. They were given at the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, published February 2015. I commend them to you so much. He's a very good preacher. He's very, very strong theologically. And I have used his material in here outside of the bibliography that I applied in, I gave in the first video. This is heavily influenced by that work. So I want to start here with Psalm 24. Let's go look at Psalm 24. All right. Psalm 24. Psalm of David. The earth is Yahweh's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to Him. For He laid the earth's foundation on the seas and built it on the ocean depths. Who may climb the mountain of Yahweh? Who may stand in His holy place? Only those whose hands and hearts are pure, who do not worship idols and never tell lies, they will receive Yahweh's blessing and have a right relationship with God their Savior. Such people may seek you and worship in your presence, O God of Jacob. Open up ancient gates, open up ancient doors, and let the King of glory enter. Who is the King of glory? Yahweh strong and mighty, Yahweh invincible in battle. Open up ancient gates, open up ancient doors, and let the King of glory enter. Who is the King of glory? Yahweh, the Lord of heaven's armies. He is the King of glory. Okay. Psalm 24. So again, if we don't know where to start, let's just start going through our questions. It's a good primer. So who's the speaker? And here, David is in the superscript. However, see next question. You know how I've said that you can generally go with the superscript, absent some other evidence. However, we think of this, is this a personal psalm or is this a corporate psalm? This is clearly corporate. it lacks personal language. We looked at Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far away from me? Do not stay far away from me. I will do this, I will do that. Very personal. You don't see the personal language here. This is corporate, this is collective. It speaks about the temple, God's holy mountain. And it speaks of the requirements of all the people. And so you can also compare it to Psalm 23. That is a personal psalm about dwelling in the house of Yahweh all the days of his life. Psalm 24, the prerequisites of dwelling in the house of the Lord are addressed. So Psalm 23, this is the most well-known psalm, I believe. So Yahweh is my shepherd, I have all of my need, ending here with, surely your goodness and your hesed, your unfailing love, will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of Yahweh forever. And then we continue on, and so now we're addressing the prerequisites of living in the house of Yahweh, living in the house of the Lord forever. So what's the purpose of this psalm? That would be the third question. I should have said speaker. David is the author. I am not sure David is the speaker in this particular one. So what is the purpose of the psalm? If we look back at verses 7 through 10, so open up ancient gates and ancient doors and let the King of Glory enter. So there's an opening of something and the King of Glory is entering. And if you look at verse 3, I think we have an idea of where this is going. Who may climb the mountain of Yahweh and stand in his holy place. So I think, thinking like a form critic, searching for the sitzum leben, the setting in life, and the performance of the psalm, it seems to indicate an opening of the gates so the presence of Yahweh can enter that place. Scholars differ on the specifics, but they generally agree that this is a procession to Jerusalem, perhaps to the temple, with the Ark of the Covenant. So Kidner says it's the relocation of the Ark to Jerusalem after claiming it from the Philistines. I actually think that's probably the most likely myself. Hasselbullock talks about Solomon bringing the Ark into the temple, which would raise an interesting question. What does that mean for the Psalm of David? Now, you could make a good argument here, and an argument that I wouldn't necessarily disagree with, which is the psalm was written to David because David was the one who wanted to build the temple. And so when Yahweh's presence was finally coming into the temple, this psalm was dedicated to David and the promise that was made to him and the fulfillment of his desire to build a house for God. So you could do that. That makes sense. Peter Craigie says multiple possibilities. He leans towards the procession of the ark from Obed-Edom to Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6, prior to the promise of the temple being built, where David's like, what the heck? Why does God live in a tent and I live in this palace? We should build a more grandiose place for God. However, the general thrust of this is that the Ark of the Covenant is being processed into the dwelling place of Yahweh. So this brings us back to the speaker then. Who might these speakers be? Who are the people who are going to be bearing the Ark of the Covenant and going to be telling people to open the gates up? The priests. So I think the priests are the speakers here in this psalm, even if David was the one to write it. So this one now, I know I kind of poo-pooed the liturgical aspect in Psalm 22. I think there's very good evidence that what we're dealing with here is a liturgical psalm used in worship. And in fact, ancient Jewish sources have, in the Second Temple period, this was performed on the first day of the week in the temple. Now, it doesn't tell us about its original performance because the Second Temple was after the first one was destroyed. But this does tell you that this was performed liturgically in the temple as a sort of a march for Yahweh. So is it a praise psalm or a lament psalm? This one's easy. It's clearly a praise psalm. How about the genre? So this doesn't fit neatly into the categories we outlined of praise, lament, thanksgiving, trust, royalty, wisdom. Craigie and Whithoff call it a hymn, and I think they call it a hymn because of its heavily liturgical nature. I don't think a hymn is a genre. I think a hymn is a form, but that's different. You can have a hymn of praise. You can have a hymn of thanks. You can have a hymn of lament. If you look at our hymnals right now, that's what they are. So I think calling it a hymn is like saying, is this an apple or an orange? Well, it's pink. Say, well, that's not the same thing. You're mixing categories. Bullock suggests the possibility of wisdom, but he says that Psalm 24 and 15 are perhaps in a separate genre by themselves. Perhaps we should just let them be that way. I personally think this is a wisdom psalm, though it does have. I will admit that it's not a pure wisdom psalm because of the liturgical element at the end. So, but having these discussions are the kind of things that can make you realize things about the psalm you didn't think of before, because it forces you to think about, how would I categorize this? So what are the key repeated elements? This one's easy. It's the end there. If you look at open up ancient gates, open up, let the King of Glory in. Open up, let the King of Glory in. Who is the King of Glory? And then Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. He's the King of Glory. Yahweh is strong and mighty. Yahweh is invincible. Yahweh is the Lord of the heavenly host. The heaven's armies, as the NLT puts it. NRSV, I think, somewhat unhelpfully gives you, Lord of Hosts is fine. It just doesn't tell you what a host is, but that would be fine. I don't like the Lord Almighty. No, you're missing the point. It's the Lord of something. It's the Lord of the heavenly host. What are the heavenly host? Well, it's the angelic. It's the corps of angels. It's the army. But those are the key repeated elements in this psalm. They come here at the end. So it suggests here, especially because it's an answer, question, answer, question, answer, it suggests a call and response style liturgy. I think that's a fair inference here, that this was something that would have been performed perhaps even antiphonally, sort of like we do sometimes with the Psalms, where somebody will read a line of the Psalms and then we respond. Somebody reads it and then we respond. That's done as part of the Catholic liturgy every Sunday. I believe it's done in many Lutheran churches as well. Is not so common in our church. We used to do it. We don't so much anymore. But, so in summary, Psalm 24 is a psalm of praise from the priests as they approach the dwelling place of God, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Is the temple there or not? Good question. But it's possibly sung in a liturgical fashion as part of their worship upon entry into the temple. So that's how we orient ourselves. This is the priests approaching the temple, giving praise to Yahweh as they do so, bearing the presence of God along with them. And that's a really key part of this. If they're carrying the ark, they are as close to the presence of God as anyone can ever get. So, with that in mind, let's go into the theological interpretation. So let's look at the first couple verses. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the sea and all that in them is. For he laid the earth's foundation upon the seas and built it upon the ocean depths. So we see there the sovereignty of God as part of the emphasis. It recalls creation, right? Founded upon the seas and the depths, if you remember from Genesis chapter 1. And some of you who've seen a lot of these Bible Geeks episodes are knowing that I found a new toy that I can display the Bible pretty easily. But yeah, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And it's upon that canvas that the world was created. So yeah, you have the recollection of creation being founded upon the seas. Creation was God's original dwelling place. That was his temple. When God rested on the seventh day, God's rest in temples. We went through this. If you're interested more in the historical, in its cultural context interpretation of Genesis chapter 1, I recommend the first video in the Covenant series. So that might even be, is it season 1 episode 2 or season 1 episode 1? It'll be either or. But yeah, God's dwelling place with humanity originally was creation. That was his temple. And so the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. He founded it upon the seas. He established it upon the waters. He created the whole world. And that is where God was dwelling with humanity until the fall. And so that recalling creation is very appropriate for Psalm 24, for the procession into the temple, God's current dwelling place at that time with his people. When you go into the next verses, who may stand in his holy place? Okay, standing in his holy place. Standing in the presence of a royal required an invitation to do so under pain of punishment. So if you were summoned by the king, you came in and you had no idea what the king was going to do. The king might be ready to lop your head off. The king might be ready to bestow a great honor upon you. The king might be looking to ask you a question. But when you came in, your face was down. You bowed before the king, and you didn't dare look up unless he invited you to do so. If you did, that could violate the sovereignty of the king. That was an act of defiance. And he might have been India when he called you in, but you could just decide to chop your head off anyway if you wanted to. Standing in the presence of the king, who may stand, who may be accepted in his holy place? The one with clean hands. And this isn't just ritual cleanliness. We'll see that in Psalm 15. This is not just doing the one who's washed. I think you can see that from the context. This is both external and internal cleanliness that we're seeing here. Only the one whose hands and hearts are pure, who do not worship idols and never tell lies, they will receive Yahweh's blessing and have a right relationship with God their Savior. So we see that the purity of heart, and this is being sung by the people who are carrying the ark that bears the Shekinah glory, they better be, this is on their mind, who may approach Yahweh. And the one who has the clean hands and the clean heart, who is not worshiping idols. So do not lie or worship idols. It recalls the Decalogue, the one who follows God's prescriptions. Then you get into verses 7 through 10. So the doors are being asked to be raised so that the ark, the throne of the Shekinah glory in the Holy of Holies, may enter. Lift up your heads then is recalling, this was, the NLT said open up, but if you're familiar with other translations, so lift up your heads, O gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors. I think if you see that here in New American Standard as well, lift up your heads, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of Glory may come in. This is acceptance as well. The lifting up of the head was the act of royal acceptance. It recalls the invitation given by the king to say you are no longer required to bow. But it is also so that the King of Glory may enter his holy place. So Yahweh, mighty in battle, that's addressed in there. The covenant blessing is spoken of here. Covenant blessing, so if you are obedient, if you listen to my statutes and obey my statutes, then, and included within all of the covenant blessings are victory over their enemies. You will drive the Canaanites out. I will be with you. So Yahweh, mighty in battle, is a recollection of the covenant blessings. Then the Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of heaven's armies. We talked about that a little bit already. So we'll keep going. So what do we gather from this psalm here? Yahweh, the creator of the world, the Lord mighty in battle, is being given a triumphal procession. And there's a question at the center of the psalm. Who may approach? Who can stand in the presence of this King of Glory? Are you allowed to come as you are? Or are there conditions given for worship of Yahweh that Yahweh will find acceptable? Clearly there are. There are ethical considerations placed on worship that Yahweh will accept. Now, if you're resisting me, right now, we know that some worship is detested. Calf worship is out. Child sacrifice is out. And, if you gave your child to Moloch, it's not like you could sacrifice your child to Yahweh and then it's like, okay, well, that's totally cool because you did it to Yahweh. In fact, you remember when Abraham did that. he was stopped from it. So the actual sacrifice is not the point. So it's not just that somebody says, well, I'm doing this for Yahweh. Otherwise, you could dedicate anything to Yahweh. You could dedicate any act whatsoever. And if you say, well, no, it has to be within a certain constraints, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, there are constraints on it. You can't offer, you can't go steal $2 million and then say, no, dude, it's cool, I gave it to the church, in an act of worship for Yahweh. It doesn't work that way. Yahweh would look at that as any well-functioning human would, as dirty money, and say, I don't want your stinking money, take it back. It's of ill-gotten gain. So, lest we think this is the only example, we press onward. Psalm 15. Let's take a look at Psalm 15 here. All right. Let's go to the New Revised Standard. Okay. O Yahweh, who may abide in your tent, who may dwell on your holy hill? Those who walk blamelessly and do what is right, who speak the truth from their heart, who do not slander with their tongue and do not do evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors, in whose eyes the wicked are despised, but who honor those who fear Yahweh, who stand by their oath even to their hurt, who do not lend money in interest, who do not take a bribe against the innocent. Those who do these things will never be moved. So look at the NLT real quick. Who may worship in your sanctuary, Yahweh? Who may enter your presence on your holy hill? Those who lead blameless lives and do what is right, speaking the truth from sincere hearts. Those who refuse to gossip or harm their neighbors or speak evil of their friends. Those who despise flagrant sinners and honor the faithful followers of Yahweh, and keep their promises even when it hurts. Those who lend money without charging interest, and who cannot be bribed to lie about the innocent. Such people will stand firm forever. The word of the Lord. Okay. Do you see the differences there between the NRSV and the NLT? That's why I really do like what the NLT has done. It's good to have another translation alongside it. All right, so speaker superscript is David again. However, once again, this is obviously a corporate psalm. So just because David's at the superscript and he may be the author does not necessarily, once again, mean he's the speaker. It may have been written by David. Honestly, that eludes us for now. So what's the emotion in the psalm? Is this praise or lament? Is it either? I'm on the side of, it's closer to praise, but it's in the middle. It doesn't really fit that particularly well. So to the question, what is the genre of the psalm? I'm inclined to think of this as a wisdom psalm. So the other one I said, Psalm 24 contains wisdom, but it also has the liturgical aspect to it. I'm inclined to think of this one as a wisdom psalm in and of itself. This fits that category very well because it's talking about the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. It talks very much like Psalm 1 does. Happy are those who follow in the ways of God and who meditate on his Torah, but woe to the wicked, again paraphrasing. So it's characterized by admonitions. The way of the righteousness and avoidance of the wicked are spoken of. So I'm going to call this wisdom. What's the purpose of the psalm? So the purpose, I think it comes down to the question, who may abide in your tent and dwell on your holy hill, Yahweh? It's meant to answer that question. In other words, who is welcome to approach Yahweh in worship? And the form critics are going to call this an entrance liturgy. This is where worshipers inquire how they may approach. So the way that somebody like Peter Craigie would characterize it is people will approach the temple and ask who may enter. And then the response is the one that's given, those who fulfill the following criteria. So if we look for key repeated elements, we'll find that it's not necessarily words that you find, but you find repeated themes. And so Peter Craigie has put together actually 10-fold ethical requirements. So he has 5 positive conditions, 5 negative conditions that he finds in verses 2 through 5. Walk blamelessly, do what's right, speak the truth, despise the reprobates, and swear to do good. And then the negative, the stuff that is absent. Do not speak falsehood. Don't be evil. Looking at you, Google. Do not reproach. Don't charge exorbitant interest. Don't charge any interest. That's usury. Do not accept bribes. So those are the things that you see as rhymed meanings throughout, though it's not necessarily repeated elements. So I would say that there aren't any strong repeated elements like we saw in, say, Psalm 22, or you see in a place like Psalm 150. But you do have this emphasis on the tenfold ethical requirement. Now, once again, let's say, assume this outline is true, tenfold ethical requirement, what's that going to make you think of? It's certainly going to make you think of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments, also characteristic of wisdom literature, it's mnemonic. You have 10, so you can count on your fingers and know when you're done. So, taking that, let's start to do our theological interpretation here. So the question is, who can be accepted in an audience with the king? The requirements are, as we saw in Psalm 24, ethical, they're not ritual. You're looking at the person. Now, Dr. Bullock points out that dwell can be translated as sojourn, so who may journey with the Lord, not merely a state of righteousness. I think that's an important caveat, actually, or we need to have that idea that it can't be a full demand of perfection. Because if you look at the psalm immediately previous, the Lord Yahweh looks down from heaven, this is Psalm 14, on the entire human race. He looks to see if anyone is truly wise, if anyone seeks God, but no, all have turned away, all have become corrupt, no one does good, not a single one. Will those who do evil never learn? They eat up my people like bread. You have the entire human race right here. When you say the entire human race, somebody could make a covenantal argument that, oh, he's looking at the nations outside. After all, look at verses 4 through 7. No, this is talking about the entire human race. No one does good. All are corrupt, not even one. So this isn't an absolute requirement of perfection, but it is a requirement of orientation. Where are you pointing? It is indeed the way that we can think of repentance. Where is your aim? Are you pointed at unrighteousness, or have you repented? Have you changed direction and are pointing at righteousness? So I would say that's probably, if we were to get into biblical theology here, that's the way that we would need to understand Psalm 15 and 24 for that matter. Because even in the Old Testament, it's identified that none are righteous. Nobody can claim perfection. Jewish theology will say that nobody is perfect. There's an atonement ritual for a reason. It's not like you can't enter the temple and offer right sacrifices. People are held accountable for their sacrifices in between days of atonement. So it isn't a full-on demand for perfection, but it is a demand of orientation. So Adrian Nussen comments here, so there must be no acts of worship to which nothing corresponds in a man's heart. God is fed up with rote prayers. And I think that's right. Now I'm going to say something that could be a little challenging to folks in our congregation here, but before we dismiss the rote prayers as something that just the Catholics do, scripted liturgies, how often do we sing things? And I picked a quote from a recent hymn, sing about how our hands are up with hearts abandoned, without raising our hands or abandoning our hearts. Do we even listen to what we're singing? Do we even mean it when we're singing it? Like, we'll sing a whole bunch of things, but that's an indictment. If we're not living that, to use those words is a rote prayer. And that's the kind of rote prayer that you can say it all you want, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can't look to that and say, I have worshiped God today because I read the words that were on the screen with everybody else. That's not a state of worship. And we have to be thoughtful about that. And I think we also have to be thoughtful about our hymn selection. That's a different point. I'm not saying that unless your arms are up, you're falsely worshiping God. My arms aren't up. I'm honestly not singing that part. I can't. Again, like I said, we should be thoughtful about what words we choose to say in prayer. I think we should be thoughtful about that. That's the point that I would make. Now I want to emphasize a few other examples here, because it's not just in the Psalms, it's not even just in the Old Testament, but there's other examples of right versus wrong worship, accepted versus not accepted. So look at Genesis chapter 4, the story of Cain and Abel. In the course of time, Cain brought to Yahweh an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And Yahweh had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Then Yahweh said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." Right off the bat, acceptable worship and not acceptable worship. If you do well, will you not be accepted? Cain's offering was not accepted because of Cain. The Lord, in fact, in some translations, and I would have to look at, let's see. Yeah, there's some translations that I like, because it says the Lord looked on Abel. Yeah, had regard for Abel and his offering, for Cain and his offering he had no regard. I have heard it someplace, and I don't know which translation it is, and I don't know if it's right, but I've heard where it's the Lord looked on Abel and accepted him, and the Lord looked on Cain and did not. And that it was, people brought the offering, but one was accepted and one wasn't, based on the person, not the offering. Deuteronomy 10, "And now, Israel, what does Yahweh your God ask of you but to fear Yahweh your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul?" The service is with the whole person. It's not just, it doesn't say, what does Yahweh require? Do the sacrifices. That was part of the system, but that was part of the system. What Yahweh is asking for is to serve with all your heart and all of your soul. This is an echo of the Shema prayer in Deuteronomy 6. Let's see, another one. Matthew chapter 5, mouth of Jesus, Sermon on the Mount. "When you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, then come and offer your gift." Your status, your gift, should wait until you have sorted things out. It's a tough command there. Micah chapter 6, we know this one. "With what shall I come before Yahweh and bow myself before God on high?" This is worship. "Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will Yahweh be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you but to do justice and love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" What is true worship? Right here, Micah chapter 6, "With what shall I come before God? A broken and contrite heart, O Lord, you will not despise." Psalm 51. That your life is your worship. And when you come before God, you come before him as a full person. It's not like God's got blinders on and only sees what happens in church. By the way, here, "the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul," this is a commentary on pagan worship. I've heard it used as a reference to Genesis 22, Abraham and Isaac. I wouldn't do that. Somebody could convince me, but this is about somewhat in mockery of the pagans. Because after all, Isaac was not being offered for sin. That it isn't for my transgression. What is required of you? There's the ethical requirement of the person. That is what you should come before Yahweh with. You should come to him with a repentant heart, a broken and contrite heart, one who is striving to sojourn with God. Then Luke 18, we are very familiar with this one. "Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. So here you have an illustration that the true orientation of your heart, the broken and contrite heart of the tax collector, was accepted. So this is more like that sojourning that was spoken about. If we're looking at the Psalms that say the one who's pure in heart, who doesn't do all those unethical things, but at the same time we recognize that everybody does. What is the acceptable orientation? What can you come to God with? You can't come with rote prayers. You can't come with self-righteousness. You must approach with your person oriented in the right direction. Repentance is required for truly restorative and transformative worship. And I think we downplay those requirements with the just as I am kind of thing. Yahweh has more requirements for acceptable worship than you just show up. It doesn't count. This is not to mention Exodus 19 and the prerequisites to the approach to Sinai. They said, before you come in my presence in Exodus 19 for the covenant ceremony, you must do these things. You've got all the ceremonial law of Leviticus. You have Hebrews chapter 12, pursue peace with everyone in holiness, without which no one will see Yahweh, will see the Lord. So true worship is a way of life, is the point that I think we should take away from the Psalms here. Words can be said to no effect. To be honest, God's not impressed with just words. Not all who say to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven. And why would we think that their worship is accepted, and then it's like, well, never mind, you're going to the bad place? No, he's looking on the person, and true worship comes through their life. Life is characterized by seeking justice, by love. Humility is the sacrifice that God accepts on his holy mountain, in his holy presence. I can't help but think about, again, how people, we talk about being in the presence of God and what that means. If any of us were to really be in the presence of God, we would not be giddy happy. You look at the people who've been in the presence of God. You look at Isaiah in the throne room, who pronounces a curse of death upon himself. You look at Ezekiel, who hits the deck. You look like 5 times when he's in the presence of God. You look at Habakkuk talking about the rot in his bones. You look at Peter, who sees the miracle of Jesus and says, depart from me, a sinner, just bowing on the ground. God's tremendous majesty is awesome, and we cannot be casual with it. And when at the end of Habakkuk, when it says the Lord is in his holy temple, let all keep silent before him, like, do we prostrate ourselves in worship, or are we casual about it? I'll editorialize one other minute here while I can, but when I was in Portugal last summer for my brother's wedding, he was getting married in a cathedral from the medieval era. The ceilings must have been 3 stories high, flying buttresses on the outside, all of the marble on the inside, the decorations throughout, the paintings, the sculptures. And you walked in, and there was the cross at the back, and the tabernacle where they put the Eucharist, because the Catholics believe in the transubstantiation, that the substance, that which hung on the cross, is present in the elements of bread and wine, and how that is exalted up there, and there's an altar, and you can't help but just look around and say, I have transported, I am in a different place. This is truly awesome, and I am small before the holy God. Do we have that orientation, or are we casual about it? In other words, if you don't live the Christian life Monday through Saturday, God does not care if you sing loudly and in tune on Sunday morning. Worship is about a way of life, and it's about the whole person. And we see that through the Psalms and throughout the whole Bible. But I want us to take the Psalms as a direct reference to that, because I think it's very important. So in summary, Book 1 is heavily Davidic in nature. It's characterized emotionally by lament, focuses a lot on the actions of the wicked and the enemies. We saw that in Psalm 22, which can be understood in its context, but requires the New Testament for proper application today, about how we are to act towards our enemies now in light of Jesus' teaching. Lament psalms are the most common type. They're honest, they're honest about their lament, but they're characterized by trust as well. And then the psalm should teach us that worship is not casual. We should not treat it that way. So that's our teaching on the Psalms today. That is all for now. I thank you for watching. I hope you come to Bible Geeks if you're around and you're watching this from home. And if not, I hope you enjoy the series, and I hope you enjoy the next one. So take care.